Tuelci by Gustavo Bondoni. What's wrong with her? We don't know. Dr. Alejandro Benetti shook his head in frustration. Every time an economic opportunity convinced him to leave the capital, it was the same story. Small-town nurses were always extremely willing and helpful, but their training left a lot to be desired. The further one got from Buenos Aires, the worse it became, and when one reached small resort towns in Patagonia, it was necessary to keep a close eye on the staff for the patient's sake. Is she showing any symptoms? No, the people at the home brought her in because they say she wasn't looking well. I looked her over and she seems to be healthy, but very, very old. Carlos Ramirez was one of the letter nurses the doctor had encountered, but perhaps it was just his turn to show the gaps in his preparation. Did you ask her what was wrong? Of course, but she doesn't speak any Spanish. A foreigner. It wouldn't have surprised Alejandro at all. During the winter months, Esquel filled up the Brazilians and the Europeans, though why an old lady would come to ski or practice extreme sports was beyond him. No, she was born 10 kilometers away, says Tuelci. Tuelci, he shrugged, the natives that used to live here, they're all gone now. Let me see her. The old woman was just as advertised. Her dark face was lined with chasms and crevices, which deepened as she smiled. There seemed to be nothing outwardly amiss, yet the director of the nursing home had been adamant that there was something wrong with her. Alejandro's examination brought no obvious problems to light, and his questions, asked out of habit, received incomprehensible replies or sad smiles. Out of the corridor again, he concerned Carlos and the director of the nursing home. Is there anyone who speaks Tuelci? The director, a 50-ish woman with platinum hair, replied, No, we've never needed it before, since she wasn't speaking Spanish perfectly until yesterday. We don't even know what she's speaking is actually Tuelci or just gibberish. Well, at least now Alejandro knew what had been disturbing the director so badly. When one of your patients suddenly forgets how to communicate with you, you look for an expert opinion. Well, does she have any family? Someone who might know how to talk to her? She has one adult granddaughter who lives in Buenos Aires. We've gotten in touch with her, and she's flying in tomorrow. The director hesitated. We'd prefer it if she stayed in the clinic tonight. Alejandro sighed. The nursing home was covering its bases. If the old woman died, they had nothing to do with it. Worse, there was no point in arguing because the director probably knew someone on the city council who had a cousin on the hospital's board. He just hoped the granddaughter could be of some use. Designer clothes, blue eyes. You don't look much like your grandmother. Jimena smiled. A Welsh grandfather and an Italian mother will do that to you. Have they told you the situation? She nodded. I don't think I can help much, but I want to be there for her. Do you speak Tuelci? Jimena laughed, a tinkling, pleasant sound that cut through her concern and brightened her features. You don't know much about Tuelci people, do you? Well, I know what kills them and how to keep them from happening, and how to keep that from happening. Everyone is pretty much the same on the inside, you know. Her face spoke her disbelief, and she went on. Tuelci is a dying language. A few years ago, there were 4 native speakers, all very old. I haven't seen any new statistics lately, but it might be safe to assume that my grandmother is the last one alive. She's 93, you know. I didn't know. The home said she was in her late 80s. Can I see her? She's right there, Alejandro said, pointing towards the door of the only private room in the clinic. They hadn't wanted to put her in a ward, and there was hardly any other patients on residence. She didn't touch her breakfast this morning, and she looks a lot worse than she did yesterday, he didn't say. The woman nodded silently, the veil of concern down again. Impulsively, Alejandro followed her to the room and stood silently just inside the door as the woman spoke softly to the wrinkled woman on the bed. Jimena's words were in Spanish, but the replies were impossible to understand. No recognition shone in the grandmother's eyes, and the smile was the same as the one that she'd given the doctor. There was little time left to her, and nothing outwardly wrong that he could detect. Perhaps the blood work would show something, but it would be days before that came back from Bariloche. Then it hit him. The scratchy sounds the woman was making might represent the last time Tuolchi language was spoken on the face of the earth. How long had it lasted? 1,000 years? 2,000? He wanted to take Jimena by the shoulders, shake her, and tell her to appreciate the importance of the moment, to drink in the every sound, to keep the woman talking as long as she could. But that would be inhuman. Jimena was losing her grandmother. But what the world was losing was priceless. He was inured to death and illness, but he had never been present at anything of this magnitude. So, Dr. Alejandro Benetti stood just inside the door of a tiny clinic, 1,000 miles from Buenos Aires, and listened harder than he'd ever listened to anything in his life. Linguist on a Mission to Save Inuit Fossil Language Disappearing with the Ice by Mark Brown, The Guardian, August 12, 2010. Stephen Pax Leonard will soon swap the lawns, libraries, and high tables of Cambridge University for 3 months of darkness, temperatures as low as negative 40 degrees Celsius, and hunting seals for food with a spear. But the academic researcher who leaves Britain this weekend has a mission: to take the last chance to document the language and traditions of an entire culture. I'm extremely excited, but yes, also apprehensive. Leonard said as he made the final preparations for what is, by anyone's standard, the trip of a lifetime. Leonard, an anthropological linguist, is to spend a year living with the Inuit people of northwest Greenland, a tiny community whose members managed to live similar hunting and gathering life to their ancestors. They speak a language, the dialect is called Inuktitut, that has never fully been written down, and they pass down their stories and traditions orally. Climate change means that they have around 10 or 15 years left, said Leonard. Then they'll have to move south and in all probability move into modern flats. If that happens, an entire language and culture is likely to disappear. There is no Inuit written literature, but a very strong and distinctive, intangible cultural heritage, according to Leonard. If their language dies, their heritage and identity will die with it. The aim of this project is to record and describe it and then give it back to the communities themselves in the form of future generations can use and understand. The Inuits thought that they were the world's only inhabitants until the expedition led by the Scottish explorer John Ross came across them in 1818. Unlike other Inuit communities that were not significantly influenced by the arrival of Christianity in Greenland, so they retained the elements of a much older shamanic culture, and their life is not very different now to how it always has been. Many of the men spend weeks away from the hunting seals, narwhal, walruses, whales, and other mammals. And while they have tents, they still build igloos when conditions get really bad. Their language is regarded as something of a linguistic fossil and one of the oldest and most pure Inuit dialects. Leonard was yesterday saying goodbye to family and friends in Eastbourne. On Sunday, he flies to Copenhagen. It's the only place where you can buy a Greenlandic Danish dictionary, and then it's off to Greenland, taking 2 international flights to get to the main Inuit settlement in Quinag, on the northwest coast of Greenland, north off Baffin Bay. There, Leonard expects to hone his linguistic skills and build contacts for 7 or 8 months before moving to the most traditional Inuit outpost in Siorpaluk, the most northern permanent inhabited settlement in the world, and where about 70 Inuit live. It will be here that Leonard hopes to hear the storytelling that lies in the heart of the culture. Leonard's interest in the Inuit began 10 years ago when he read Mary Herbert's book, The Snow People, an account of life with the Inuits, but it is only recently that he learned how imminent the threat is to their way of life and their culture. I just hadn't realized how endangered the community was, and this whole culture could simply disappear. Normally, languages die out because of its parents deciding they don't want their children to speak it. Leonard, who is 36, will have to adapt to many things, not least the extreme temperatures. Although the average temperatures in negative 25 degrees Celsius, it can plummet to negative 40 degrees or soar to zero in the summer. Then there is an Arctic darkness, with the sun expected to go down to October 24th and not rise again until March 18th in this time of year that elders talk and pass on their stories and poetry. Did you know the language defines a culture? The rate of languages disappearing has accelerated dramatically in recent years. A language dies every 14 days. There are more than 7,000 languages spoken on Earth, many of which are not recorded. By 2100, more than half of existing languages may disappear. A language often disappears because a more powerful group's language renders it obsolete. Some geographic areas, in particular Siberia and northern Australia, are under a severe threat of language disappearance. Studying language helps us understand how the people communicate and store information. A lost language means the lost opportunity to learn how brains work. Nevertheless, Leonard admitted, "I really don't know how I'm going to deal with it, to be honest." There appears to be a certain inevitability to the Inuits being soon forced from their ancient homeland to southern Greenland, making Leonard's mission all the more pressing. Climate change is already leading to a noticeable reduction in seal numbers, and the ice will soon become so thin that it will be impossible to use dog sleds. Leonard intends to record the Inuits and, rather than writing a grammar or dictionary, produce an ethnography of speaking to show how their language and culture are interconnected. The recordings will be digitized and archived and returned to the community of their own language. These communities, which could be just years from fragmentation, want their cultural plight to be known as to the rest of the world, he said. Although the climate change catastrophe facing the Arctic is well documented and the Inuits are visited frequently, Leonard hopes this visit will be more meaningful than others. One thing I have been told is that they are tired of journalists popping in and reporting how awful it is with the icebergs are melting, and then that's it. So they've been keen that someone comes and lives with them and reports back. Trust by Susan Keensolving. Trust that there is a tiger, muscular, Tasmanian, and sly, which has never been seen and never will be seen by any human eye. Trust that 30,000 swordfish will never near a ship, that far from cameras or cars elephants' herd lives long elephant lives. Believe that bees by the billions find unidentified flowers or on unmapped marshes in the mountains. Safe in caves of contentment, bears sleep. Through vast canyons, horses run while slowly snakes stretch beyond their skins in the sun. I must trust all of this to be true, though the few birds at my feeder watch the window with small flutters of fear, so like my own.